X. The chair scraped back so hard it left a mark on the floor. X. That was the first sound anyone made. Not applause, not laughter, just that chair, and then silence so complete you could hear the ventilation system humming somewhere above the drop ceiling. X. Zara Mensah did not look up from the whiteboard. X. She kept writing. X. Let's back up, because if you walked into that boardroom at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning in February, you wouldn't have understood what you were seeing. You would have seen a woman in her early 30s, medium height, wearing a dark blazer over a white shirt. Her locks pulled back, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in numbers. You would have seen 12 men in suits watching her, and you would have assumed, reasonably, that she was giving a presentation she had been invited to give. X. You would have been wrong about the last part. X. Zara had not been invited to anything. X. She grew up in Scarborough. If you know Toronto, you know what that means, and if you don't, here is what it means. It means you learn early that the world has already decided what you are before you open your mouth. It means the school guidance counselor looks at your test scores and suggests trades. It means when you say you want to study engineering, someone always asks which kind, and when you say aerospace, there is always a pause. A specific kind of pause. X. The kind that contains an entire conversation nobody wants to have out loud. X. Her father, Emmanuel Mensah, was a civil engineer who had recertified 3 times in Canada because his Ghanaian credentials kept not being enough. He worked for the city. He reviewed drainage plans for subdivisions and never complained about it, not once, not in front of his children. But Zara had found his original portfolio once, in a cardboard box in the basement, and the work in it was extraordinary. Bridges. Load distribution models for elevated transit systems. X. The kind of work that should have had his name on buildings. X. Instead, it was in a box. X. She did not forget that box. X. Zara enlisted at 19, not because she had no other options. She had been accepted to Waterloo, but because something in her needed to prove something she could not yet name. She spent 8 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, 4 of them in logistics and signals intelligence, 2 attached to a NATO coordination unit in Brussels, where she learned, among other things, that the people making the largest decisions were very often not the smartest people in the room. X. They were simply the loudest, or the most comfortable, or the ones who had gone to the right schools and shaken the right hands and never once been made to feel like they were borrowing space that belonged to someone else. X. She left the forces at 27 with a service commendation, a mild hearing loss in her left ear from a training incident outside Petawawa, and a clarity about what she wanted to do next. X. She wanted to build things. X. Real things, systems things, the kind of infrastructure that cities run on and nobody thinks about until it breaks. X. She enrolled at Ryerson, Toronto Metropolitan now, they changed the name, and finished her engineering degree in 2.5 years. Took extra course loads every semester. Slept about 5 hours a night. Her classmates were younger and had more time and spent it differently, and that was fine. She was not racing them. She was racing something else. X. After graduation, she applied to 14 firms, got 3 interviews, 1 offer. She took it. X. The firm was Halcyon Infrastructure Partners, one of the mid-tier engineering consultancies that clusters around the downtown core and does municipal contracts and occasionally lands something larger. It was not her dream job. It was a door, and she walked through it, and she kept her head down and did her work and waited. X. She waited 2 years. X. Here is what happened in those 2 years. X. Zara was good at her job, better than good. Her project analysis reports became the ones other people quietly referenced when they were preparing their own. She found an error in a load calculation for a transit station expansion that would have cost the city approximately $4 million to fix post-construction. She flagged it. It was corrected. The senior engineer on the project, a man named Patrick Holden, received a commendation from the client. X. She is not on the commendation. X. She flagged that too, internally, once, in an email that was never answered. X. She kept working. X. The project she was assigned to in her second year was a bid for a major federal infrastructure contract, a new rail corridor connecting 3 mid-sized Ontario cities, the kind of project that comes along once in a decade, the kind that reshapes firms and careers and sometimes regions. The bid team was 12 people. Zara was one of 2 women. She was the only black engineer. X. She was assigned the ridership modeling, Specifically, forecast passenger volume under 4 different economic scenarios over a 20-year horizon, accounting for population shifts, modal competition, and federal corridor policy changes. It was exactly the kind of problem she had been waiting for. She spent 11 weeks on it. Nights, weekends, early mornings before the office filled up and the noise started. She built a model that her supervisor, when she first showed it to him, described as thorough. She smiled and went back to her desk and rebuilt it from scratch, because thorough was not what she was going for. The second version integrated real-time census migration data, cross-referenced against historical ridership elasticity from 6 comparable corridors in Canada and Germany, and included a sensitivity analysis that could update projections dynamically as input variables changed. It was not thorough, it was something else. Something that would anchor the entire bid if anyone understood what they were looking at. She presented it to the bid team on a Thursday afternoon in November. The meeting ran 40 minutes. Mostly the senior partners discussed the visual formatting of the pitch deck. The bid presentation was scheduled for the second Tuesday in February. It was to be held at the offices of the Federal Procurement Agency, a glass tower on Spark Street in Ottawa. The night before, the lead partner on the bid, a man named Jeffrey Crane, sent an email to the team listing who would be attending and in what capacity. Zara's name was not on the list. She read the email 3 times. Then she read the attached agenda. Her ridership model was cited twice in the executive summary. Her name appeared nowhere in the document. She replied to the email. She asked politely whether the attendee list was final. Jeffrey replied at 11:48 p.m. He said the client had requested a streamlined team. He said her work would of course be fully represented. He said he appreciated her contributions to the project. Zara read the email. She put her phone face down on the kitchen table. She sat there for a while. Then she booked a train to Ottawa. She did not tell anyone she was coming. She bought the ticket herself, early morning via rail, arrived at Ottawa Station at 8:15, walked to the Sparks Street Tower in the February cold without a hat because she had forgotten hers on the train, checked in at the lobby desk as a visitor because she was still technically on the visitor pre-registration list from a planning meeting 6 weeks earlier that no one had thought to remove her from, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The Halcyon team was in the waiting area when she arrived. Jeffrey Crane saw her first. His face did something complicated. Zara, he said. Good morning, she said. There was a silence. One of the junior partners, David Lim, she had always liked David, looked at his shoes. The other senior partner, whose name was Aldous Fitch, and who had never once in 2 years addressed her directly, looked at Jeffrey as though waiting for instruction. Jeffrey said, I thought I explained. You did, Zara said. I'm here anyway. The procurement agency staff came to collect them before Jeffrey could say anything else. They were walked down a corridor and into a large boardroom with a long table and a screen at one end and 12 people already seated, the Federal Evaluation Committee, serious-faced and holding printed copies of the bid document. Jeffrey introduced the team. He named 5 people. He did not name Zara. She sat down at the table anyway, at the far end, and opened her laptop. The presentation went smoothly for the first 20 minutes. Jeffrey was a competent speaker. He covered the firm's credentials, the project timeline, the engineering approach. David presented the cost analysis. Aldous walked through the risk framework. Then they got to the ridership projections. Jeffrey advanced to the slide. It was Zara's model, formatted into their template, her variables and her sensitivity bands, and her 20-year scenario outputs rendered in the firm's blue and gray palette. He began to explain it. And here is the thing about spending 11 weeks building something. You know every corner of it. You know why each assumption is what it is. You know where the model is robust and where it makes a bet. You know the question before it is asked. One of the committee members, a woman with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a lanyard, raised her hand. The elasticity coefficient in Scenario 3, she said. It's lower than what I'd expect given the density projections. How are you accounting for induced demand in the Western segment? Jeffrey paused. It was a very brief pause, half a second, maybe less, but Zara had been watching for it. I can answer that, she said. X. 12 heads turned. X. She did not look at Jeffrey. She pulled up a secondary tab on her laptop, the working document, the one with all the underpinning, and she walked the committee through it. The elasticity coefficient in Scenario 3 was calibrated against a specific historical analog, the Kitchener-Waterloo Ione corridor, adjusted for a land-use policy variable she had modeled separately because the publicly available data did not capture it at the right granularity. X. Induced demand in the western segment was handled in a submodel she had built as a sensitivity check, not included in the base projection because it introduced variance that would have widened the confidence interval beyond what the procurement guidelines asked for. But she had it. She had the numbers. She had built it in case someone asked. X. Someone had asked. X. She talked for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She knows this because she timed herself afterward, replaying it in her memory on the train home, checking her pacing, checking whether she had been clear. X. When she finished, the woman with the silver hair wrote something down. X. The room was quiet for a moment. X. Then the committee chair, a tall man who had not spoken yet, said, "And you are?" X. Zara Mensah, she said. "I built the ridership model." X. He looked at her. He looked at Jeffrey. He looked back at her. X. Why isn't she listed on the team sheet? He asked. X. Jeffrey said something about roles and presentation scope. The chair wrote something down too. The evaluation continued. X. After the meeting in the elevator down, Jeffrey did not speak. David caught Zara's eye and gave her a small nod, the kind that means, "I saw that, I know." Aldous looked at the elevator buttons with great concentration. X. In the lobby, Jeffrey said quietly that they would need to talk about professional conduct. X. Zara said, "Absolutely." X. She meant it differently than he did. X. The firm received a follow-up from the procurement agency 3 days later. The committee had additional questions about the ridership modeling. They requested that the relevant team member be available for a technical clarification call. X. They requested Zara by name. X. She took the call from a small meeting room on the 6th floor. It lasted 90 minutes. The woman with the silver hair was on it, and 2 of the technical evaluators, and they went through the model in a detail that Zara found genuinely enjoyable, the kind of conversation she had been waiting 2 years to have. She answered every question. She offered to rebuild one of the scenario outputs using an alternative assumption set they proposed, just to show the range of outcomes. X. She did it live on the call in 11 minutes. X. One of the technical evaluators said, "That's impressive." X. She said, "Thank you. The model's designed to be flexible." X. He said, "I mean the speed." X. She said, "I know the model." X. The contract was awarded 6 weeks later. X. Halcyon Infrastructure Partners won the bid. It was the largest single contract in the firm's history. There was champagne in the boardroom on a Friday afternoon, and Jeffrey made a speech and thanked the team and named 7 people. X. He named Zara this time. X. She stood in the back of the room with a plastic cup of something sparkling and thought about her father's portfolio in a cardboard box in a basement in Scarborough, and about the drainage plans he had reviewed for subdivisions that were not his, and about a specific kind of pause that contains an entire conversation nobody wants to have out loud. X. She drank the champagne. X. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. X. And then on Monday morning she submitted her letter of resignation. X. She did not do it impulsively. She had been building toward it for months, quietly, in the margins of everything else. She had registered a numbered company the previous September. She had spent evenings putting together a service framework, a small consultancy, infrastructure analysis and modeling, the specific technical work that sits between the engineering and the decision-making and gets attributed to someone else. X. She had 2 potential clients already, not from connections she had made at Halcyon, from connections she had made in the military, people now working in procurement and municipal planning who had watched her work and remembered. X. The first contract her consultancy signed was a ridership analysis for a mid-sized transit authority in British Columbia. Not huge, enough to start. X. The second came 4 months later, a federal pre-qualification assessment, infrastructure planning tier, the kind of work where your name goes on the document. X. Her name went on the document. X. There is something you should understand about what happened in that Ottawa boardroom. Jeffrey Crane did not set out to erase Zara Mensah from the presentation team because he had calculated a strategy. He did it the way these things usually happen, without fully thinking about it. Because it was easier, because the team photo looks a certain way and he had got used to it looking that way. Because her name on the list meant questions he did not want to field. Because there is a version of this that lives just below the threshold of deliberate and still does exactly the same damage. She is not the first. She knows she is not the first. She is also not interested in being the last. Her consultancy now has 4 full-time staff. 2 of them are recent engineering graduates, both women, one of them a second-generation Nigerian-Canadian from Mississauga who reminds Zara of herself at 23 in the specific way of someone who is trying not to take up too much space. Zara has a standing instruction for her: send the detailed version. Always. Even when they ask for the summary. Send the summary, but attach the detail, because when someone in a room asks the hard question, you want to be the one who has already anticipated it. The woman with the silver hair, whose name Zara later learned is Dr. Patricia Nowell, sent her a message through LinkedIn 8 months after the Ottawa presentation. She was sitting on the evaluation committee for a new federal program. She was looking for consultants. She asked specifically for Zara. Emmanuel Mensah came to visit his daughter's office last spring. She had moved into a proper space by then, 4 rooms on the 3rd floor of a building on King Street West, the kind of address she used to walk past and not quite let herself look at. He stood at the window and looked at the street below, and she made him coffee, and they talked for a long time about nothing in particular, the way people do when they are actually talking about everything. Before he left, he looked around the office, at the drafting table, in the corner, at the whiteboard covered in variable notation, at the framed copy of the first contract she had signed, hung beside the door because she had read somewhere that you should mark the things that actually happened, so you don't let them slip back into feeling like they might not have. He stood there for a moment. He did not say anything. But his face did something she had never seen it do before, and she understood it exactly, and she did not make him explain it. Some things do not need words. She just let it be there, in the room, between them, where it belonged. I keep thinking about that cardboard box in the basement. Not the boardroom in Ottawa, not the contract, or the champagne, or the moment 12 heads turned at once. I keep thinking about a box of bridge designs that nobody ever asked about, sitting in the dark under a staircase in Scarborough for 30 years, and what it means that the person who drew them never complained. Not once. Not in front of his children. There is a kind of integrity that does not announce itself. Emmanuel Mensah recertified 3 times and kept showing up and kept doing the work and never let his children see him fold. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Because Zara did not become who she became in a boardroom. She became who she became in a house where she watched someone choose decency over bitterness every single day, and she absorbed it without knowing she was absorbing it, the way children do. That is the part people miss when they tell stories like this one. They focus on the moment, the woman at the whiteboard, the question answered, the heads turning, and they treat it like a single event, like something that just happened to her. But nothing just happens. There is always the 11 weeks of nights and weekends that came before. There is always the father's portfolio that came before that. There is always a long, unglamorous chain of choices made quietly, in private, when nobody was watching and there was no reward for making them well. I think about what it actually takes to build a model from scratch because thorough is not enough. Most people, if they are honest, would have accepted thorough. Thorough gets you through. Thorough is what the job description asks for. But Zara went home and started over because something in her could not leave work on the table that she knew was possible. That is not ambition in the way people usually mean it. That is something closer to self-respect. A refusal to give less than what she actually had, even when no one would have known the difference. And then the hardest part, the part I find myself sitting with longest. She submitted the resignation on a Monday. She had already built the company. She had already made the calls, registered the number, done the quiet groundwork while still showing up every day to a place that had taken her analysis and erased her name from it. She did not blow anything up. She did not write the email she probably had every right to write. She made something instead. X. She turned what was taken from her into the reason to build something that was entirely hers. X. That is what I want to hold on to. Not the vindication, though the vindication is real and it matters. But the orientation. The understanding that what you build from your own hands on your own terms, with your own name on the document, that cannot be reassigned. Nobody can put that in a box under the stairs. X. When Emmanuel stood in his daughter's office and looked at the framed contract on the wall, he did not say anything. He did not need to. Some things close a loop that has been open for a very long time, and when they do, the right response is just to let them. X. I think he knew exactly what he was looking at.